Hello and welcome to the second podcast of the Westford DEI Committee. I'm Joe Diamond, the co-chair of the DEI Committee in Westford, Massachusetts, along with Anjali Rajput, who will be with us next month. Today, we have a special guest, Magaly Ronan, who is the Director of Equity, Curriculum and Instruction for the Westford school system, joined our school system last year and hit the ground running. We're looking forward to the conversation we'll have with her today, but just a few programming notes. As I said, this is the second podcast for the DEI Committee, and the overall purpose of the podcast is to bring as much awareness as we can to the community about the work of the DEI Committee, and it supports one of our strategic goals, which is celebrating diversity in Westford. We want to be able to reach people in a variety of different ways, and we thought this would be a really good one. Last time I spoke with Joanne Durr and Patricia Rapucci, who are both members of the committee, and that podcast was titled "Get to Know Your DEI Committee Members," which we'll do on a regular basis when we don't have a special guest. We learned about each other in a three-way conversation, and we're going to be doing that next time in November with Mary Claire O'Neill and Anjali Rajput. This time, though, we're really pleased to be able to talk with you, Magaly, about your work in Westford, what brought you here, and sort of your approach to curriculum development and the intersection with diversity, equity, and inclusion in your work. It seems to me very encouraging and I think refreshingly obvious that equity is a part of your work because it's in the title. So again, we're really glad that you're here. Welcome. And if you wouldn't mind just sort of saying hello and giving us a little bit of information about your background and what brought you here.
Well, thank you for having me, Joe. It's nice to finally get to this point. I know we've been talking about it for a long time.
Thank you.
So what brought me here, actually, I spent 22 years teaching in an urban setting, actually 24, two in another city, and I needed a change after 22 years. And honestly, what first enticed me to Westford was that there was a principal opening at the Miller School.
Oh, interesting.
And so I had originally applied for that because I was in a former assistant principal role. And I didn't get the job, obviously, but this job was also opening up, and so it appealed to me, and so I applied, and I understand why the interviewing was so rigorous, because it was important that they found not the right fit, but the right add-in to Westford Public. And the reason why I say that is because with diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're not looking for people to fit in. We're looking for people in our school to add to our school district, to add, to push, to question, and also to recognize all of the great work in making the connections to the teachers that what they're doing is working. At the same time, we need to be looking at our marginalized groups because there is some equity concerns. So I became an educator because I always wanted to be a teacher. And for me, growing up as a product of teenage parents, coming from an urban setting, from projects, I experienced busing, and that's when you really notice the differences because the inner city kids were starting to be bused to, neighborhood schools around the city. And so that's where in first grade I noticed the difference between the haves and have-nots. And then in seeing that, and seeing the environment, I grew up in the city in the 80s and 90s, and if you know, back then, there was a war on drugs, there was, poverty, and I saw what was around me, and I knew that wasn't what I wanted for my life. So I really used education to lift myself up and to make sure that I was able to get a strong education so that I could lead a satisfying life and feel secure. But at the same time, I also wanted to give back to students that I saw myself in. I didn't have a Puerto Rican teacher until I reached high school, and I didn't see myself in the curriculum, even as a 30-something-year-old. It was the first time I picked up a book that was called When I Was Puerto Rican by Esmeralda Santiago. And what's interesting when we're dealing about people's identity, their diversity, their I do this sometimes. I lose my train of thought.
Don't we all?
I know.
You're just talking about the book that you read.
So there's that intersectionality of being in two worlds and having a foot in two worlds, going through education in a public setting, where you have one foot in the Hispanic community and then one foot in the white community, and not really feeling like you're a part of it. You're not white enough or you're not Puerto Rican enough. And so, those are kind of the formative experiences that I had growing up, and being able to walk into a classroom as a young teacher and to let the kids know that I speak Spanish and that I too grew up in a city. I too know where you live in the projects. I firmly believe that getting a great education is actually an equity leveling of opportunity for all.
Yeah. And I think that schools are an environment where equity and the way we understand it is really given expression in some sense. I agree. I think public schools recognize that we all come from different places, but that where we're headed is toward equal opportunity. And that's
kind of like employment.
Right, like employment. And I think, and we're actually working on a definition of equity, which I think we will share town-wide eventually. But when it comes to the schools and when it comes to the way that you think about equity in the school system, it's sort of an exciting concept. Can you tell us a little bit about how it informs or has informed your overall philosophy about curriculum development? I'm very interested in that. How does a person in your position think about the curriculum, and then how do you integrate, if you will, concepts like equity?
Well, one of the things that I always believed and expressed to my students is that we can't choose our circumstances, but we can choose to overcome them. And in my position now, first of all, I have to give credit to the committee that drafted the title and the description, because they put equity in the forefront. And in coming from another district where the DEI chief officer was not connected to the curriculum office or the Office of Teaching and Learning, it didn't feel right to me. And so when I saw that match in the job description, I was like, finally, somebody gets it. And so in relation to curriculum, that's where the rubber hits the road. And we have to plan and think in a way that is inclusive of all of our students. And so one way that we are approaching that here is through Universal Design for Learning, which is a framework that is based on brain research. And it is also coming at the angle from that all learners are different, that there is a wide variability of learners. And if we plan, for the margins and make sure that we have the proper scaffolds and supports in class and giving the kids choice, then we're teaching them to self-manage and to self-advocate and to be problem solvers. And we're going from a traditional setting of schooling where it was built for factory work, and in this environment, in next generation of 21st century skills, rote learning and following directions or procedures without asking why why are we doing it this
Right,
way, or
right.
why is this is what happens. I have so many ideas, and then I like lose my train
Well,
of
let me
thought.
ask you this question
me.
about a universal design for learning.
Yes.
Tell me what that means specifically, and what is universal about it?
So universal, I would think about a good analogy for that is when we need to withdraw money from the bank. We have options. We can go into the bank physically and walk in. We can go to the ATM, or we could just use our debit card, And so we have many options. If we want to shop, we've got Amazon, we've got delivery, we've got pickup. And so we want to approach education similarly. What are all the ways that I can remove barriers and provide access? So I would also think of it in a way of what are the highway ramps to get on to the same end in mind?
Yeah, that's
and so
interesting.
there are many pathways for learners to show what they learned, but the intentionality of planning for that is what UDL is the overarching framework for us. So UDL is based on 3 principles, and each principle is connected to a part of the brain. We have the affective network, which is about our emotions. It is the why. Why are we doing this in learning? And we want to try to find engaging ways and connect it and make it relevant. In that relevance, we are leveraging what our students' stories are, what their experiences are, what is their background knowledge. And if we can hook them with that relevance, something that they're passionate about, like if they're into Pokemon cards, then as a teacher, I'm going to use that in my lessons to hook them in. I also, in that engagement principle or the affective network, is I also want to minimize risks and threats within the learning. We want kids to take risks. We want to also encourage them to self-manage. And I'll add to this that the 21st century, or the next generation of 21st century skills, is not a lecture and you pour the knowledge into me and then I take a one exam to show you. What we're saying is, I want to know what you know so that I can anchor new learning to it, and then I can engage you, and then I'm going to come up with different ways that I can represent the concepts. So it might be pictures, technology, audio, video. It may be models, manipulatives, whatever way that I can represent those concepts and skills. It gives kids choice of how they learn best.
So you're paying attention to different learning styles.
Yes, thank you.
So interesting and exciting to hear.
And there's no average student. So there's no average. I think it's Todd Rose from Harvard that talks about some of that work. There is no average student. We are all neurodivergent, neurodiverse, and we are all different.
That's so interesting. There are, however, there's a framework, sort of a classical framework that schools, public schools, not necessarily Montessori schools or but public schools, is a classic framework that schools pay attention to in terms of providing information, testing for that information. But it sounds like within that framework, you all and your colleagues, and based on your title, there is an endorsement from the school board and the superintendent for there to be sort of this innovative approach. So what are you seeing? What are you most excited about as you look forward?
Well, I'm excited about us thinking about the engagement principle, which is the first principle. And just to back up a little bit, the second principle is multiple means of representation, which is all those other models or ways of showing or demonstrating. And that is the recognition part of your brain, which is the back part, more of the occipital lobe. And then we have action and expression, which is what are all the different ways that kids can show their work. That's not a traditional quiz. I mean, they have a place in assessment for sure.
Sure, yeah.
But it's not the only way. And so what UDL is saying is that it's not a one-size-fits-all right now. And if we're going to prepare our kids to be critical thinkers and problem solvers, we've got to start that in the classroom. Because the jobs that they're going to have out there are not going to be the jobs that we have today. So I'm excited about shaping that and providing equity within the curriculum by teaching the coordinators, teaching the principals about the framework, and that our job is to find entry points for all of our children. And I'm seeing that in the curriculum as well, because we have adopted new curriculum. I'm excited about the foundational skills curriculum that we piloted last year and rolled out this year. Even though we had a short period of that, at the K to 2 level, we've assessed our kids and we see that there's already some movement. So that is promising and encouraging. At the 3 to 5 level, we also adopted a new science of reading curriculum. It's grounded in research. It is telling us that we need a systematic research evidence-based curriculum to teach comprehension as well as the phonics or the foundational skills. And we did that because what we've been doing is not working to reach all of our learners. And so that is exciting for me. We did a year of intro last year. It was like year 0 with the leadership team. We looked at equity by design for UDL. And this year I was able to offer a University of Westford course for universal design.
Oh, interesting.
And so we had about 13 participants that were part of that. And so it was exciting for me to be able to get back into like the classroom setting and to teach colleagues or teach adults, and then to hear their feedback of what they tried and what risks they took in the classroom. For example, what was exciting to me is when they shared out at the next class, like, what have you tried? What did you do? And
this is for the teachers in the school system.
Yeah, so the teachers took the course, and then their homework was to go back and try some of these techniques.
Oh, interesting.
And what some of the teachers said to the high school kids, they gave them choice. They said, you have a choice of these 3 assessments. You can do the traditional quiz, you can do a comic strip, or you could do a video audio. And the kids were not comfortable with the choice. And they're not comfortable because we haven't been giving them choice and voice. So some kids took the traditional test because that's what they were comfortable with. That's what they know. And when the teacher went back, they didn't do so hot on that test.
Interesting.
So the other kids chose the other alternatives to show what they know. And then the kid said, can I do that instead of this quiz and kind of change my grade? And the teacher said, yes. And that's part of the mastery oriented is we're working towards individuals making progress towards mastering a standard, which is an end of year goal. So they've tried those techniques a few times of giving them choice of how they learn the content, how they engage with it. They've given them choice on their homework and assessments. And so the kids are starting to and the teachers to get a little bit more comfortable. Mind you, it is a small sample of teachers. But the other piece of UDL is, in my role, is also modeling it. So anytime I'm in front of the principals or I'm in front of my teaching colleagues or the curriculum coordinators, if we're doing PD, I always ground it in UDL. So I try to lesson plan in that way. What are the barriers? How can I minimize those barriers? Everybody's in a different place. How do I give them choice with content? Do they want to read an article? Do they want to watch a video? Do they want to interview someone? And then how are they going to show that? And so the teachers that took the course were like, yes, can we start having our professional development UDL'd, like having more choice? And we did talk to the principals about that. And I know that there were attempts last year for them to kind of give more choice and sessions of like, you can sign up for this session in their professional development during like early release today.
It reminds me of when I was in college and I studied for just a semester in another country. And one of the finals in one of the classes involved answering some questions. And I was having trouble with which one to answer. And the professor came over and I explained my dilemma. It was a slightly different approach to teaching there. And he said, just tell me what you know. He said, what was the most fascinating part of this class? And now tell me about that. And that was a paradigm shift.
Yes.
For me. It worked out, but it was completely surprising and exciting. Not the way when I returned to college in the States, not the way that, that they did it there, but I can see how being able to incorporate that would appeal to people who have, different learning styles. If the goal is mastery, by the end. I wanted to just also talk a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion, and when we ultimately, together work out a definition of equity, it'll be something. But I'm hearing elements of it in everything that you're saying. You and I served on a panel in the summer.
Yes.
You might remember that.
At the high school.
It was about diversity and inclusion with some high school students who are actually students who are coming into high school, and then some high school students. And it was all of it was interesting and moving. And just one question among many that I found to be particularly interesting and provocative was a young lady, I think a junior, said, "I'm looking forward to the time when more teachers and more of the administrators look like me." Which is absolutely an element of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm interested in your perspective on Westford. Westford is becoming more and more diverse, and I think so many interesting ways and rapidly. And so there are cultural differences that we are embracing. That's our sort of our philosophy at the DEI committee, is to embrace differences, recognize our common humanity, embrace differences. And so I'm curious about how, as you think about, and this is, having to do with numbers, I suppose, demographics. When you think about demographics, Westford is changing, and the high school is changing, and I think for the better. What is your perspective on the curriculum and then how the diversity that we're seeing in Westford?
So it's interesting because. Yes, I mean, even in urban settings, it's the same issue. The faculty and the staff are not reflective of the students. And so that is hard. I remember giving a talk to some high school kids when I was an assistant, and they were Brazilian, Portuguese, and other cultures. And what resonated with them was that intersectionality of having, their parents are in their culture, but these children are in two worlds. And so in the district here, what we've tried with curriculum, and we can get back to defining the words because that's important too, the terminology, is that if we've tried to diversify the curriculum in a sense of offering more literature that is reflective of our students. Through our ESL Title I grants, we were able to order Rising Voices, which is a series of elementary books that have protagonists that are of different cultures. And so that's available too. The other piece is last year and into this year is the Dr. Cleary, our former assistant superintendent, along with a committee of us, worked as a panel to improve our marketing of Westford in hiring and making it more inviting to promote ourselves, but in particular to be more sensitive to styles of learning and presenting. And so traditionally folks would have 10 questions of essay questions to answer. And if we're just basing our interviews or who we select to interview based on that, then that's limiting because that may not be the way that someone shows their best skills. We have a pamphlet for a brochure for the whole district that is marketing us. We have data at a glance, and then each school, the K-2s, the 3-5s, and Westford Academy created their own brochure to solicit. And so we also designed 5 universal questions that we would use for all interviews, so that we gain a sense of their philosophy and what drives them, what's their passion, and then we would get into the content specific. And it was Alexander, I think his last name was Alexander, and he's the black man, and he's like, don't ask me about a DEI question. I live it every day. And so like that's how we kind of force it in without really being authentic about it. So that's part of the diversity. It also in the curriculum, the way we approach it, the UDL framework is guiding our equity work. Right. And again, if we are in education and our job is curriculum instruction, equity is where it's at. Other districts, they have separate DEI coordinators, and they're not embedded in curriculum. So everything I do is connected to curriculum and instruction.
And I'm sure that among the teachers and the students, this is so obvious. For those of us who are not involved in the school system, there are real strong indications of it. And I'll just give you one example. We have been before the school committee a couple of times on a couple of matters. One had to do with Holocaust Remembrance Month, and the committee endorsed that proposal, and also Holocaust Remembrance Day, Holocaust Education Month. And we also came before the school committee to ask for support for Indigenous Peoples Day. And in both of those interactions with the school committee, it was very clear that those topics, that information was already part of the curriculum. And so there's the overall framework and philosophy, which you talked about, Universal Design for Learning. There's also the sort of the content-specific information that I think supports DEI. By the way, do you have a few more minutes?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I do.
And I'm sure that our listeners are glad that you do.
I still have plenty of time.
I wanted to get into talking about some of the sort of joint projects that we're working on. One of them is the movie that was just screened in Lowell, and we're hoping to bring it to Westford, called Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America. And then just so you know, we can talk about this maybe at a later date, we'll be working on how to sort of bring to fruition the Holocaust Education Month down the road. But talk to me a little bit about the movie. I wasn't able to go to see it, but I understand that it was really compelling. Madonna McKenzie part of our committee was there, and I know that you guys have some plans.
Yeah, I attended it too, and which was
wonderful.
great because there was a nice showing of community members from the greater Lowell area. One example of who we are is, in education, there are 7 forms of bias, and one of them is if we leave one story out, one side of the story out, or we present things that are through rose-colored glasses, or maybe stereotypical. In who we are, they put it all out there. They put the history out there. One thing that stuck with me from that film was the symbol of the police officer badge. And so I didn't know that symbol is alarming to people of color, because when the slaves were emancipated, there were bounty rangers or pseudo, and that's the badge that they had, and they would go and try to find the slaves and bring them back for bounties or for rewards. And so that symbol of the badge, when it had the kind of the star with the points, that triggers people, and it's in their DNA. It's in their blood. They've grown up with this, this fear and trepidation of people say while driving black, you have to have that talk with your child if they're multiracial and they're driving. So that was a piece in the movie that stuck with me, is to understand the meaning and the feelings and the reaction to certain symbols in our culture, and understanding why there is that tension between police sometimes and marginalized groups. So it is an honest rendition of our history.
And the plan is for us to
Yes.
try to have a showing in Westford,
Yes.
I think, for the general public.
Yes. So in talking with Madonna, who's on the town DEI and the school DEI, which is awesome because now we have that cross-pollination of representation,
Indeed.
which is neat because then we can keep that two-way conversation going. So CTI has 10 licenses, and we jumped on it right away. I think Madonna sent an email, and I sent an email to 2 different people, and then CTI was like, wait a minute, they're both from Westford.
Community teamwork, the Community Action Agency.
Yes, community teamwork. And so they have 10 licenses. We've asked for 1. There is talks that we could possibly have 2. And so Madonna and our work is we already had an initial meeting with the rep from CTI, and the audience that we're hoping is to make it a community showing. We're going to try to have it at Westford Academy in the theater in the evening. And so, we want to invite the community members, but also staff, faculty, and representation from the schools. It would be nice that, other departments from the town of Westford also attended. So if we get 1 license, then we'll do like a big showing. If we can't accommodate all that, then we may do 2 showings. So we may do one for the town and do one for the schools. But we'll try to make it so that it's like a hybrid of an audience.
But Madonna was very excited at the meeting we had last night, and she's looking forward to being able to bring it to the community. We're also excited because I think it's an opportunity for us to have some of these crucial conversations. Do you think that there might be a discussion before or after?
Well, yes, that's part of the planning. Is that Sadia, who's the DEI coordinator
at CTI.
Yeah, at CTI. Madonna and I had a Zoom call with her. So one of the representatives from CTI needs to be present, and then most likely, yes, we want to do a Q&A at the end and have a forum where we can have those discussions.
I happen to know Sadia from what I do during the course of the day.
Oh, yeah?
She would be wonderful.
Yeah.
I don't know who's planning to help moderate that, but she would be great.
Yeah, I think she did offer to help, so I'm going to take her up on that offer. and Madonna will work on it together. But then going back to the DEI definitions that you had asked about earlier, is when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we may all have different meanings. Our personal meaning, what it means when we're in public.
Right.
And so in order for us to have this cohesiveness and being able to talk about the same thing, is we need to define it. And so one of the things I learned from UDL work is that we need to have a concept stabilization, which means when you say equity, you and I know that we're talking about the same concept. And so that's something that we've thrown out there in the DEI committee last year as what's a next step for us this year. And that was one of the things we landed on, is defining those. So we actually attempted that. We did that activity last week with the DEI committee.
Related to equity.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. We defined diversity. We defined equity. We got like a brainstorming of ideas.
Oh, that's great.
And then Madonna did share the student rep on the town DEI, who wrote an eloquent paragraph on what diversity, equity, and inclusion means to them. And it's so good, I might steal it because it's spot on. And it was engaging because just knowing within our committee, we didn't all have the same views of what we meant by diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right.
And when we are trying to make curriculum relevant to kids and engaging, we have to take their culture and their diversity in consideration.
Absolutely. You know, the exercise, which I think is absolutely critical, and it's almost self-evident, but it didn't occur to me or us until recently, and in part because of the conversations you all have had, that we need to have a common understanding, a shared understanding of these terms. That will help us enormously in so many ways. One of the ways is that we have another strategic direction, which is to integrate DEI across town boards and committees. We're deeply engaged in the work with the school department, if you will. But we'll be talking with the police chief soon. We'll be connecting probably with affordable housing committee soon, maybe the planning board. But before we do that, we need to have this platform, this framework, this scaffolding of a common understanding, and in order to be effective in terms of potentially specific initiatives with any one of these boards, or just being able to help them to conceive how DEI can be integrated. Without a sort of a common understanding, it's not helpful.
It would not be as cohesive.
And it would be sort of based on differing definitions. So anyway, that's exciting too. We're looking forward to that. We're so pleased that Madonna, I think Ankit Panda, who's the student, as well as Mary Claire.
Yes. And so in the school DEI committee too, we have a good representation. We have about 43 members, and all of their principals are part of it, play a role in it some way. And so because we have so much work to do, we are breaking into work groups or subcommittees within our DEI school district committees. So we have one working group that we defined after our definition of our words. We have equity, an equity work group, and a policy and professional development. And the reason we landed on those was because equity is in our strategic district plan, and equity is part of the audit that Dr. Chu has prioritized. And so last year, a lot of work was put into soliciting requests for proposals for an audit. The town was very generous in supporting that with funding. And so in finding those proposals, the equity this work group will be vetting those proposals. And we got 4 proposals. And they're all very different. And so the committee is going to look at them and vet them and see which one matches our strategic district plan the best.
The subcommittee.
Yes. And then use that vetting to put forward recommendations for which auditor we will choose. And the auditing process includes teacher interviews, stakeholder focus groups, a deep data dive, even to the point of like, are our buildings accessible? Are we inclusive in that? And then the policy subcommittee is going to work on reviewing all of our policies and through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also through that UDL lens of is this, and this could be universal in a sense of a litmus test, like who are we privileging? Who are we marginalizing by this decision? And who are we missing from this discussion? Because if we have a homework policy, for example, who does that privilege? Who does that marginalize? And in some instances, it privileges kids at home that have support.
Right.
And the kids whose parents are working 2 to 3 jobs or are single parent, we don't know the context, but is that really effective for that student?
So those are 3 critical questions in developing curriculum that you would hope that would always be applied.
Yes. And so considerations like that, is the policy privileging someone or is it marginalizing a group? And then professional development is soliciting what are the needs of the district. I know for some it is revisiting our culturally responsive teaching and sustaining those practices, which UDL does very nicely, and also prioritizing what we need for professional development. If we want greater equity and instruction from our teachers, we've got to provide them with professional development.
Yep, absolutely. Magaly, I want to thank you for this time. We could go on for a long time, and let's actually plan to visit again, maybe in the spring.
Yeah.
To hear about some of the progress, to learn about the reaction to the movie, the conversation, and how you're progressing. I know that we'll hear from Madonna, Mary Claire, and Ankit about the work that they're doing with the school DEI committee. But this has been wonderful.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you.
You're welcome.
Very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Our pleasure. Thank you.